Welcome to Breaking News. I'm Miley and bring for you latest news on today. If the migrant caravan didn't exist, President Donald Trump might have needed to invent it. The existence of a massive group of Central Americans pushing toward the U.S. without papers, even if they are still hundreds of miles away, seems like something Trump's GOP might create in a lab to unleash on the eve of the midterms.
But the caravan is real. The migrants in it, mostly Hondurans with some Guatemalans, half of whom are girls and women, many intending to seek asylum in the US, are real people. They made the decision to leave their home countries, assessing that the danger of leaving was outstripped by the danger of facing gang death threats or feeding a family on $5 per day. And they made the decision to go together, joining the caravan as it progressed, instead of alone like tens of thousands of their fellow Guatemalans and Hondurans and Salvadorans do every year. The caravan has provided an irresistible visual for Republican closing arguments about immigration. In Trump's first TV ad of the presidential primary in 2015, he used an image of a mass of immigrants. Fact-checkers revealed that the picture was in fact taken in Morocco. Now, as he's near the midterm elections, Trump has the image he wanted all along. The decision about 160 Honduran migrants made to travel as a group in the open to the U.S., and the decision thousands have made to join them en route, is the result of a situation that predates Trump. The United States and Mexico have worked to make the journey to the U.S. less appealing to Central Americans, but many residents of the Northern Triangle find the prospect of eventual asylum in the U.S., however difficult it is to get there, more appealing than the insecurity they are facing at home. The current wave of Northern Triangle migration raises hard questions about the distinction between economic and humanitarian migration, the U.S. ability to process asylum seekers, and the role Mexico plays in the region. Those are emphatically not the questions that are coming in the Trump-driven conversation about the caravan, which is using the sheer fact of a mass of people traveling northward to activate fears of an invasion by unknownable foreigners. The first, we have to wonder, what is a migrant caravan? Over the past decade, there's been a rise in the number of unaccompanied children and families crossing the U.S. and Mexico border. Increasingly, there are people fleeing violence and insecurity, coming from the Northern Triangle of Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The U.S. has enlisted Mexico to apprehend Central American migrants before they get to the U.S. Some 950,000 Central Americans have been deported from Mexico over the past several years, and human rights groups have reported torture and disappearance by Mexican security forces. How did this caravan start? On October 12, 2018, a group of about 160 Hondurans set forth from the town of San Pedro Sula, which in the first half of the decade was often referred to as the murder capital of the world, in hopes of arriving to present themselves for asylum in Mexico or the United States. Many people are leaving because they fear for their lives if they stay, because they are being threatened by gangs and the local government is either complicit or absentee. They are seeking asylum, even if their circumstances may not fit nearly into the definition of persecution in U.S. asylum law. The size of the caravan has led a lot of people to assume that someone must be organizing and supporting it. Because the caravan is large and not centrally coordinated, however, it is impossible to know the identity of every migrant traveling with it. That makes it very easy to raise the specter of criminals or terrorists hiding within the caravan. Across the U.S. and Mexico border right now, people are being made to wait weeks at ports of entry before being allowed to officially enter the US and seek asylum. Advocates recount stories from asylum seekers of officials on both sides telling them they aren't allowed to seek asylum in the US, or of Mexican officials detaining them or threatening them with deportation after they tried to present themselves at a US port. The ultimate fate of the spring caravan, if anything, proves the point of why caravans are important, because even if size and visibility to the US and the president create political backlash, they make it harder for any individual migrant to disappear.
Tonight, the migrant caravan is growing. The group fleeing violence and poverty in Central America has pushed through Mexico's southern border, and many Mexicans are joining in as they move north. NBC's Mariana Atencio is there.
This is now a massive exodus of around 7,000 people, and they're making their way to Tapachula, which is the most important city here in the southern part of the country. It is a critical juncture for this caravan. It is where the prior caravan reorganized to move north to the United States.
We're going to keep moving forward, this man says. He's been traveling for more than a week with his 2-year-old daughter. Unlike Friday's clash at the border, now the Mexican government says it won't use force to stop the migrants. Here on the Guatemalan side of the border, patience is wearing thin. Rather than wait in this line to apply for refugee status in the heat, some desperate migrants have decided to cross into Mexico illegally. We met this woman, Gilma, as she climbed onto a raft, hoping to eventually reach the U.S. She doesn't believe applying for refugee status will work. She's afraid to return to Honduras. We live in a terrible situation in our country, she says, telling us her son was beaten by the military. But others are turning around, boarding buses back to Honduras.
Ha sido muy duro. Has it been very hard?
Sí, porque
Rosa Ulloa made the gut-wrenching decision because of her 4-month-old daughter. For her, there was too much at risk. Tonight, many migrants have gathered in the rain at this park in southern Mexico. The government is urging them to head to shelters and apply to stay in.
And this story appears in breaking news, a news from us on the latest twist and turns around the migrants caravan. Subscribe and follow us along with more about how a group of Central American migrants hundreds of miles from the US border became Trump's closing election argument. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the duration of today's program. Thank you for watching.